The UDRcast is not affiliated and does not represent any 12-step fellowship. I, Bill Ward, the host of the UDRcast, will be sharing my experience and my journey of recovery. That does include, but is not limited to, the literature contained in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous and the 12 Steps. Our guests will be sharing their own path to recovery and what has worked for them. The UDRcast encourages and supports all paths to recovery. Welcome everybody to the UDRcast. UDR stands for Uncover, Discover, and Recover. My name is Bill Ward, and I'm coming to you from the recovery capital of Canada, Calgary, Alberta. Here we are going to discuss everything recovery, different perspectives, different experiences, both with the people I know and with others from around the world. If you resonate with anything you've heard on this episode today, we ask that you share it with anyone who you think may benefit from it. If you have any questions or comments, please find us at BILLWARDLIFE and send us a message in the info section. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. If you are interested in more recovery content, you can find the buttons for the YouTube channel and other social media outlets on the homepage, and you will be redirected to those platforms. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time. So today on our episode, we have Jesse P and myself, and we have Janine H. She's down in Medicine Hat. We're recording this remotely, and today we have a bunch of questions that she's going to propose to us. And by no means are these like the hard and fast lines, but they're hard and fast lines as far as Jesse and I are concerned, just based on our experience and our sponsorship. The one thing that I would like to clarify again, which I do often, is a lot of this is out of Jesse and I's experience. So like even when we do the big book studies, it's not like a typical big book study. This is information that we've obtained in our own lives through sponsorship and what we've seen work and what we've seen hasn't worked. So it is to whatever degree compatible, but you know, most of what we say is pretty fucking true. So, you know, people can take it or leave it, but you know, it's pretty advisable that it should be taken and considered because we've sponsored enough people to collect the data and fucking connect a few dots here. Anyway, so thanks for joining us, Janine, and doing this with us today.
Okay, so I had developed a list of questions over the last few months, just common things that people are asking in recovery, like in the first year, especially coming out of treatment and trying to navigate the rooms, because there can be a lot of misinformation in the rooms, and there can be variations in things like when you should sponsor and how long is early recovery and when you should start dating and should males sponsor females and vice versa. There's just a lot of debate and confusion around some topics. So the things that were coming up quite regularly, I started jotting down. Then I came up with a list of questions that I was hoping that you guys could speak to.
Perfect. And when you develop these questions, did you see like a lot of people were confused in these areas?
So confusion around some, as you'll see when we get to them, and then there was also just areas that I was too new in the program and in experience with my own relationship with a higher power and relying on that and having the experience in recovery to speak to it with confidence. And I was finding that I wanted to give advice as I would worldly advice sometimes, and I would remember some of the things you guys have discussed on your podcast, and I just knew you would have a much better response on how to bring 12 steps into the problem solving and the the way that people are navigating early recovery. I felt like if we had some sort of direction from people who came before that was clear and right out of the book, that it would make things a lot easier. So the original idea for this conversation came as like, wouldn't it be great if there was a resource that we could just give people when they were new? I could give a lot of the girls that I speak to, like, here, this is covered in a way, here, check this podcast out, kind of thing, and that they would be able to refer back to it. So that was how the original idea came to be. Okay, you ready for the first one?
Yeah.
Okay, so coming out of treatment, the family is often a hot mess, and the addict is unprepared for how to handle the challenges coming right out of treatment in various ways. Like, I've seen people that go right back into the family home and are not expecting the kind of insidious influences from the family who is codependent or not doing their own work to support the change, and brings them down, and it like, without even seeing it happening in that way. So that's one example. But these unexpected challenges, which cause frustration and confusion and more resentment. So kids not acknowledging the hard work, where they, in the person's mind in early recovery, it's like, hey, like, I'm doing all this heavy lifting, this hard work, and then my kids aren't acknowledging, everybody's still upset with me. And how to start parenting and setting limits when you've got all this, like, track record of not being respected as a parent. And I think just like how, so I guess the bottom line is looking at, like, how do you navigate people in the family who haven't done the work, and then also the expectations around the family changing, and what that looks like with kids especially.
Want me to take it?
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. The family afterwards is probably one of the larger chapters for this. I'm much more of a originalist when it comes to the material. So a lot of the information that I give is based upon how it was written way back when, and how the information literature was written way back when is a man immediately goes back into the family. That is, he's going through the process. If the family will accept him, if he's lucky enough to have a home, right? If he hasn't burnt that down, then, he goes right to the family. He gets right to work on himself because that's his responsibility, right? And so the dynamic, there's a lot of tricky dynamics, especially with a spouse. But what we will do, and this is more 8 and 9. 8 and 9 tells you everything, doesn't tell you everything, but it gives you a really good base of what this family life's going to look like. And one of which in that process is the spouse. The book suggests that the spouse gets 12-stepped as well, right? So the spouse will get...
How realistic is that in your experience?
Very realistic. Very, very realistic. Yeah, very realistic. But so here's the thing, though, is that actually the original literature would be the man working with the man, the wife working with the wife to sober up the family unit. Now, you don't hear that, and that doesn't happen. But that's old school. That's actually what we do here. That's true. That's uncut, this program. And I've done that many times.
In the successes that you're talking about, is that how it's happened, where the wife has accessed another program or another woman who's gone?
Not always. Not always. I mean, you will find that the spouse, whether it be man or woman, is just as sick as the alcoholic addict, right?
As
Whether
it says in the literature.
Yeah, I mean, whether it be codependency, a lot of the times you'll find that. But the woman is worn out. The man would be worn out and uncommunicative. They will be resentful. Infidelity. You start putting all that in there, and a lot of the times the relationship has to start on a different basis because the former did not work, right? And that's out of 9. And so, if we could get a guy to 5, then we could get him to 9 for the family unit fairly quickly. then he could actually start putting a lot of this action in place with the family. And so a lot of the guys I work with, if you want the family, you work for it. You work for the family, right? And so if that's his purpose when he walks into the family unit, to pack into that family to no longer take, then the guy's on a strong start. But you got to remember, this is action, right? And so a lot of your actions aren't going to match up with your thoughts at first, but then eventually they will equal out, right? Where he will think of the family, then act it out. But at first it's going to be action. And so, you know, if a guy, yep.
What you're saying really is like that this is the whole attraction, not promotion, and that the expectations are wrong coming into the family. That if a person's coming in with, what can I pack into this? Not that, how come you're not noticing all this change that I'm making? How come you don't acknowledge the fact that I'm 3-4 months sober? That's the wrong attitude right off the hop.
Definitely. But that attitude will be there from 1 to 4, no matter what. Once the guy's had a 5 or the individual's had a 5, he's going to have at least some idea of what he's actually done to this family, which will be very humbling. And you won't hear him say too much from 5 to 12. Why don't they notice me? Why don't this? Why don't that? He understands. He's leveled in the family. He understands that he doesn't even deserve the family, number one, right? Whether or not, you know, they treat him right or whatever, that shit should be gone by a 5. Mind you, it could come back in a 12 if he doesn't keep the ladder steps in place. But that's what I would say. And that is, I would say that that's rectified through the 12 steps. Mainly the 5 to start really we get a real good action plan in the 9, and that should be carried out for a good amount of time for him. Because he works for the wife. He works for the family. It's not the other way around, right?
So if you have a person who's, like I'm just thinking of a couple of situations where the attitude has been like, oh, poor me, they're not acknowledging my hard efforts and stuff. So is it fair to say that perhaps their 4 and 5 were lacking?
Potentially. But if an individual says that to me, I cut that off at the knees. As a proper sponsor, you look for selfish self-centeredness, not only to bleed through the 12 steps, but also to bleed through their life. And when you catch it, you nip it right in the ass immediately. You want to correct that right the fuck away. So this man understands, like, that's like what they don't know, you know, like they don't acknowledge you, but you've shit on them. You've been absent.
Yeah.
You haven't financially been there, nor have you been emotionally been there, nor have you been physically been there. But now you got 3 months. Now you got 3 months and they should recognize you. There's something wrong with that mentality, and that is called alcoholism. That's the selfish, self-centered nature of alcoholism. But in the family afterwards, which I will do with the man if he has a family specifically, and that is common law kids or that is wife kids, and we will go through the family afterwards. And quite typically what will happen is that the man's been absent, like I said, financially, emotionally, spiritually, everything. And then when he gets sober, now he wants to take the reins of the household. And now he wants to start making the decisions where the wife's been wearing the pants for a decade or two. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of things that you want to, at least as a sponsor, you want to make sure you understand that chapter, the family afterwards, and then you can navigate him from that chapter throughout the 12 steps, and then eventually go to that chapter. So generally what I'll do after the 12 steps, we'll do like a month cool off period, and then we'll go to the family afterwards if he has a family.
You can always bring it back to, like, you know, years of your bullshit makes a skeptic out of anyone. So can you weigh in on the, when you go to the 12 by 12 and you're looking at making amends with the family, the advice there is to not rush into it. So from what you're saying, are you saying that when you get into the family afterward, and you're looking at what you can pack back into the stream of life through your family and how you can show up spiritually fit in that regard, would you say that that's starting the amends process, and that the actual verbal amends comes after you've, you know, kind of built that up and they have something to believe you on?
Yep.
Is that where it says don't rush into the actual spoken amend?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, like 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anybody, right? Which is right out of the book. And, you know, the action part is the prelude to the direct amends. A lot of the times that'll take, you know, a year or two, because he wants some spiritual tangibility before he makes that amends. And by the time he does throw action towards it, you know, it's going to organically move there with the wife. It's going to organically move there with the family if it's done properly, right? But first things first is he's working for that family. Because the reality is he doesn't have the luxury of the family. He actually doesn't deserve the family with his actions previous. So as long as he understands those types of things, and in that area, right, you know, that's a basic breeder of humility and a basic breeder of a happy family eventually, but it takes work naturally. Bill?
Yeah, you know, Jesse touched on a lot of good points. The nature of the alcoholic is selfish self-centeredness, right? So even a lot of times, like Jesse said, you get them to the 5 and they'll kind of see what's actually going on and what their harms have done. They're humbled to the point where the sponsor, which would be me or Jesse in this case, is showing them, look what you've been doing for 10 years or 15 years. Look at how your wife has bared the burden of doing all these things to keep the family together, and you've been just out fucking doing whatever you want. And like creating the humility in the 5 so that he actually tries to change in the 6 and 7. And when he goes into the family to make the amends, he's actually, like Jesse said, he's now working for the family. This is not about him. But typically, self always tries to bleed back in. And it will bleed back in. And the only way that these things like Jesse's talking about are successful is if the guy is following the processes contained in the book and he's using his sponsor and he's using his pillars and he's really trying to gain and not just get back to the business of being self-satisfied. That's why the action part of the program is so important, because if he just goes and tries to do this with the best of intention, self will bleed back in and he'll be doing the same things that he's always done, and he won't even see it, and he won't get any good results out of the family.
An example of that is like a person wanting to go out and make this amend because they think that in this amend there will be forgiveness and there will be healing, and they can't really see that at that particular moment that the person is not ready, and that the motive is actually a good intention with this selfishness to relieve their own sense of guilt and have this immediate sense of, okay, my family's back together because I did the amends, which really speaks to the importance of using a sponsor regularly, but B, that a sponsor that refers you back to the literature steady, because this stuff can get messy if you're not relying on the literature and the instructions on how to go about doing this.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opinions. Sponsors will bring in a lot of opinions, of their personal opinions into the process. And that's not what we're doing here. You can use a lot of your experience once you've gained experience in sponsorship and with amends and you working with families, individuals that are trying to reintegrate into families. You can use a lot of that experience as advice, but we always go back to the literature, and that is the foundation of everything that we do. Jesse's talking about the step 9 literature, the step 12 literature, the family afterwards literature. Like, it's all in there, and we got to find it. But I want to go back to something that you said, like sometimes these guys aren't ready, so they don't make the amend, right? They're not going to make the amend. They're going to live the amend because they're not really ready. So many guys are guided by their sponsor to go in right away and start making these amends right away. To me, that's a mistake. It's a big mistake. The wife's not even ready to hear the amend. Like, she's so skeptical still at 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, even a year in. Like you guys had said, 10 or 20 years of drunkenness would make a skeptic out of anybody. Those subconscious patterns and woundings are so deep that it takes time for that trust to be built. And she's not ready. She's kind of, keeping on a face where the shoe's going to drop and she's wondering when, but she's hoping that it doesn't. So she's trying to just navigate this in a way that she's still living in fear. And until a lot of that trust is rebuilt through the action only, and maybe that amend is finally made at 1.5 years, 2 years, even 3 years in, where a lot has changed. And in the big book, in the chapter 9, step 9, it talks about there is a long period of reconstruction ahead. And to me, the reconstruction is the individual working his own solid program, reconstructing himself with his creator. Build with me, do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me of the bondage of my own selfishness. Take away these old difficulties, these old patterns, these old behaviors that I've used, so that victory over these things will bear witness to those in my family that I will help of thy knowledge, thy power, and thy way of life. That I'm able to bring love into this family, and I'm able to navigate this with a way different foundation. But a lot of sponsors make the mistake of getting these guys to do these amends really quickly, and the guys want to do the amends quickly. Why? Because they have something to gain, and they want to get their side of the street cleared off. And the side of the street they're trying to get cleared off is just getting relief, getting some respect back to themselves through their own amend. And it's a big mistake. It actually breeds self.
The other situation I see where there's the wanting to get the relief, but the other motivation I've seen for wanting to get out there and do the amends prematurely is that fear of, like, if I don't do all my amends, I'm going to get drunk again. And so to bring, that was one of the first people that had that fear, where it's like, if I don't do this, I'm going to get drunk. You know, this would be a reassuring conversation to speak to that, and to, you know, and to go back to the book. And a lot of people, I don't know why, it's that people don't actually go back to the book. Like, how often do you see that, where somebody's really spinning out, and instead of going back to the book, they just spin out? Like, why is that?
I only see them go back to the book in regards to sponsorship. That's the main thing that'll bring an individual back to the book. So with that being said, people talking about drinking on the 9, they will drink on the 9, and this is how they'll do it. It's going to be one or two things. They're going to do the amends themselves. They're going to negate a sponsor, or the sponsor will stall them out in the 9. And I see that a lot, where the understanding seems to be that, you know, unless, and, you know, like, each step is done before you move into the next step. Well, step 9's not like that at all. In the book, it says, when we get into 10, it says we vigorously commence this way of living as we cleaned up the past, right? Which is to say, as quickly as you're on your 9 as you're on your 10, right? So when you're cleaning up the past, you're also cleaning up the present, right? And so an individual will drink, no doubt. If they're stalled out in the 9, they have to get all their 9s done before 10. Because, so in the process that we're chatting about with the family, sometime it not taken, you know, maybe a year or two to do an amend with the wife. I mean, he has to be a 12-step member, operating all ladder steps, 10, 11, 12, and sponsoring more often than not, before any sort of character change will come and bring about a proper amends to these people, the family. Like, it's always the mom and the dad seems to be the first. And these are some of the last amends that should be being made. So
Question to either of you. As you went into your own families to make the amends, like, have you noticed a benefit from waiting? I ask because I noticed with my daughter, I haven't made the actual amends yet because of these reasons, and there's been some opportunities, but I don't feel like there's been enough time. And the more time that actually goes by of me just showing up and trying to pack into our relationship what I can, I gain more clues, like, more is revealed around what I actually need to be saying in the amends, and the ways that I've damaged her, and the things that I can speak to. So along the way, the amends has actually morphed into something much more meaningful now that it's been some time, and I'm collecting this information from her in the fragments of our interactions, and I'm like, you know, so now when I do make the amends, it will look completely different than the thing I jotted out in a treatment center. Now there's so much more information and different information, and I can see how the amends has changed completely and will look a lot different than had I rushed out and done this thing that I thought I should do back then. So is that been the same experience for you?
So for me, there's two things that I want to talk about. One, answer this question. Two is, and I will come back to it, I want to kind of describe what I look for when I'm working with somebody that's in a family and how I navigate that. A lot of the guys Jesse gets, like, this is how creator works. Whatever you are and whatever your challenges are in life, typically that's what you're going to get as sponsees 8 times out of 10. Jesse's got a lot of sponsees where his spouse, Kelly, has worked with the spouse of the sponsee. Like, that's happened with this guy a lot of times. And there's other things that he gets that I don't get. And I get the type of people that I need to help me heal. So we'll talk about that after. But as far as, so I didn't make my amends to my 3 daughters till I was like 4 years, 5 years, and 6 years in. I did make amends to my mom at about 2 years. I made amends to my dad at about 2 years. I made amends to my ex-wife at about 6 months. And then I made another amend to her at about 18 months or 2 years. And why I didn't make amends to my daughters was because I was still learning so much shit in those first couple of years. I made so many mistakes trying to talk about spirituality, trying to talk about God. Look at how much your dad has changed. And all I really did was piss them off worse. And they pushed away from me at 2 and 3 years, me being sober, thinking I'm doing the right things. And they weren't ready to hear my amends because, like I said earlier, there was so much resentment. And, they loved me, but they were mad at me. And I couldn't make the amend, and they didn't want to hear the amend yet. But as the time went on and I learned some hard lessons the hard way through a lot of pain, I could see that they were changing, and I could see that they were more receptive. And I finally stepped out into it, and I think I did Lucy first. And when I went and did Lucy, she was receptive, but I could tell, I can look back now, and I was probably 4 years sober when I did this one, and she was still very combative. And part of the process of the change is they knew me as a certain person for so long, a lot of anger traits, a lot of like manipulative traits, a lot of hard and fast lines as a father. And these things didn't just go away in them. They were expecting me to be this certain person because that's all they had known. And even as I changed, they were resentful at me changing in a good way because they didn't know even how to handle it. So even when I did my amends with Lucy at 4 years in, she was still wondering, I'm speaking for her, I don't know 100%, but she was wondering, who are you? Because I was changing from an old person into this new person, and I still had some of the old traits, but I had a lot of new good traits. And so she was in the stage where she was still confused at who I was, because I wasn't the guy that she'd known her whole life. So my daughters were still pretty resentful in a confused way for those middle years. And I'm 7+ years sober now, but in those 3, 4, 5 year areas, they were confused. But I have made the amends to all 3 of them now. The last one was Lila, my oldest daughter. And what I realized about that was she just had no idea what had happened 7, 8, 9 years earlier. And she had been carrying that shit with her for fucking all these years. And she had a lot of guilt and shame that she had carried. I maybe should have done some type of amend maybe earlier in my recovery career with her when I look back at it, but I wasn't to know, right? And I did listen to my sponsor for the most part, and I just didn't know. But the thing about this journey of trying to reintegrate in the family is you go at it with your best foot forward. You go at it with your sponsor. You use your pillars, and you're going to fuck up. But if you can learn from the screw ups and you can kind of change and bounce it, like so many things I bounced off of Jesse, like a lot of the fights I've had with my daughters or my ex-wife and my resentment about child support and all these things. And there's been a number of times where I've had resentment over paying child support because my kids are all over 18. And I keep getting the answer from my pillars like, no, dude, you owe this money, and you just fucking settle into the fact that you have to pay it. And I always have. But every now and then I get self-righteous and believe that fucking it's done, it's over. I should be fucking not paying this money anymore. But I still do it. And I do it happily most of the time. And so I don't know. I don't know if I answered any of your questions there, but
No, that was good. That was perfect. Anything else anybody wants to add before I go on to the next question?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I could say on that, just for myself and my own amends, is, I ended up, probably the biggest thing, because majority of my family is in Ontario and we're in Calgary, Alberta, and I moved out here about 8-9 years ago. And the biggest thing was consistency for the family before I made direct amends. And so I timed out how I would call all the family members. So with my mother and father, it started off every 2 months because we were really estranged. For the other family members, depending on who they were, it was maybe twice a month, maybe once a month, but it would always be around the same time and it would always be around the same date. So if it was twice a month, it'd be, middle of the month, kind of like your 15th, and then the end of the month, the 30th. And what I was able to do was build a consistency for these people that, I'm here, I'm okay. And at the very least, they didn't have to worry about me over time before I had made, the direct amends to some of them. Some of them can't be seen, like all my brothers, they're all gone. I tried to kill one of my brothers multiple years ago with a baseball bat, and he's not entertaining any fucking amend, So sometimes the relationships very strained like that. But even with that brother in particular, if I am to run into him, if I am to see him again, I would be willing to make the amends, not for me, but for him, right? But for him to get some clarity, for him to get some understanding if he needs that. So that's all I would say on the amends.
That's a really good point, Jesse, because the wanting to check the amends off the amends list, it's different. It's about being willing, right? Like you said, where some people who just can't get to a person because of the anger, because of situations similar to that, where the person just wants nothing to do with it. As long as the person's willing, would you say that amends is checked off, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's like in some respects, it depends on the amend. I mean, a lot of the times I have to pray for the willingness morning and night if I am to run into that person, and then it's on God's time when I do run into that person, that type of idea.
Mm-hmm.
so and then another thing. So I have a brother who's in active addiction. I've never made an amend to him yet. And it's come to light recently because I've been waiting this whole year. I've been doing a set of steps, and one of my main objectives in this set of steps was to get to the point where I could be in the right frame of mind with the right motives to do the amend. Why I haven't done the amend, in my opinion, is because I've had a motive of self-righteousness. And to go into this amend, it's crooked. But I was informed by one of my pillars about a week ago, because my brother could die any day, really. Like, he's totally active alcoholic and addict, and he uses with impunity and avoids the family and leaves this part of the country to go to another part, and then you just don't hear from him for weeks or months. And the honest truth is, I've been expecting the call that he might not be here for many years. He's still here by the grace of God. But when I brought this up to one of my pillars a couple weeks ago, he had said, dude, it's actually selfish that you won't make the amend. You don't know what the amend that you can make right now might do for him. And if he died today, how are you going to deal with that? And, he really brought some clarity because my own perfectionism wants me to not do it until my motives are 100% always in check here. And he had told me, like, you don't have to be perfect. You don't have to do this perfectly. You really have a desire to fucking work this program and be led by your creator. Even if your motives aren't 100% here, go do this amend if he allows you to. And at least get that done. because you don't know what that will do to him, and you don't know what it will do for you. So get your head straight, get your heart straight, and then when he is around, and if he accepts the opportunity that you're going to offer him for an amend, then go do it. And you know what? Like, if he did die and I didn't make this amend, because I got a lot of guilt and shame based in his addiction. I got a lot of guilt and shame because of how I beat him up a lot when we were kids, and made fun of him, and I did a lot of things that weren't like really good for him, which maybe played a role in his addiction. So there's some deep subconscious guilt and shame. And if I don't deal with some of this, even though my motive is a little bit selfish, but the thing is I'm actually talking to my pillars about it, and I'm getting some good counsel on it. And I do believe, and it's come to light, that I should make it. Mm-hmm. And what's happened, because I put this into the universe, I got a text from my mom the other day that he wants to give me a call because he's actually hitting a bottom again out there in Manitoba. And mm-hmm. I never thought that he would say, I want to talk to Bill again, because last year I fucking tore a strip off him, and then I haven't heard from him since, right? And that's part of that self-righteousness, is when I took that strip off of him. So yeah, I don't know. Every situation is different.
How you just described all of that, I was just thinking, for the people who think that this is all just a linear, do, it's like, it's so multidimensional how we're going through recovery, and we're doing the best we can to grow along spiritual lines. And some of this stuff comes much quicker, these relationships with people. Some of it's clear early on, and then some of it, it's like, you did what you're supposed to be doing, is I'm checking my motives, I'm doing this and doing that. And then came a place where you had grown enough spiritually, and life had aligned in a new way, where it's like, okay, I got to be talking about this again, and look how things line up again. It's fascinating looking at how things line up in recovery, how the universe sets things up for us when we're doing the things we need to do.
Roger. And so, just kind of before you move on to the next question, as I described earlier, when I work with a guy, my main focus is the guy, okay? He might be married, he might have a girlfriend, he might have kids, who knows? But my main focus is, I want this guy to have a spiritual awakening. I want him to eventually at some point become a spearhead for God's ever-advancing creation. I want him to be authentic with the truth of himself. And a lot of times when people get into these relationships years ago, a lot of the motives were really crooked and skewed right from the very start. And some of these relationships should have never have stayed together. But, the results of some of these twisted relations with other people, we end up having kids, and we end up tying ourselves into these long-term relationships that maybe we had no real business being in. At some point, the relationships disintegrate based on so much self, so much overlap of codependency, toxicity, and these kind of things. And a lot of times that will be part of the fuel on the fire of their addiction. And then by the time I get them, and I get to know them, and I get to see, and I get to do their 5, there's a lot of what I see is these guys they shouldn't even have ever been in the relationship. And they've been actually selling out their soul and their self for a lot of this relationship that ends up being toxic, because it's all built on the foundation of self. So for me, when I'm working with somebody, I may guide them to a point, and I never tell them what to do or to leave anybody, but I want them to be true with who they are. And if that relationship has to go, then that relationship has to go. And when these guys step into that, which is very difficult, because typically the codependent and toxicity within the relationship really wants to pull and keep them there. But I've found that a lot of guys can grow into their own authentic truth using God only, their creator. And then the relationship that they have with their ex over time actually becomes a really healthy relationship, and they build a friendship. And yes, the family dynamic isn't what it typically should be, but there's so much value that comes out of it, and the kids learn a lot of good things as well. So like you just said, the path of recovery is not linear. There's very complex aspects to working with the psyches of the men and or the ladies that I work with, and then the psyches of their family, and how everything kind of works together and how it pushes apart even. So my main job when I work with somebody is I work with them to have a spiritual awakening. If they want to be with the family, if they want to be with their spouse, I'll do everything I can to keep that in alignment. But if all the signs are telling me that this is probably not the best idea, I don't actually say that, but the truth reveals itself through the loving journey of recovery, and they can do whatever they want, but it becomes really apparent of what they should do. And a lot of times they will do that and take that step, and it's a very difficult step, but it's a great step because they usually are at the point where they're crushed so bad by their own self-imposed bullshit that they will trust God in a new way. And then it usually ends up in a really good way with the ex and the family and their own authenticity. And they find a relationship that's actually healthy. Because the thing about unhealthy relationships is, yes, you need to separate yourself from relationships to get good with yourself. But the only way to rebuild a good, healthy relationship is to get in a good, healthy relationship. Right? Yeah. So once you're getting pretty good with yourself, you got to step into the world and try it again with somebody else, because you can build and heal through the new relationship with somebody else. And that's the only way to really build in a new relationship and heal the relationship aspects of yourself, is through a new healthy relationship, right? So, yeah.
Thank you for tuning in to the UDRcast. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. The viewpoints and the opinions expressed today were solely of the individual sharing them. If you resonated with this episode, please follow us and share this link with anyone that may benefit from it. Please visit us at BILLWARD.life to see everything that we have going on. We can recover, one person, one family, one community at a time.